Hi, friends. Just a quick note that in this episode, I talk a lot about death and grief, and in particular, I talk about the man in this picture, my wife's grandpa, Steve. That's his wife, Betty, next to him on their wedding day. They were married for 70 years until she died in 2022. And when I recorded this, Steve was on his deathbed, and he died the day after I recorded this. Thank you for being here. Hi, friends. Today, I am sad. Welcome to the good world.
1, 2, 3.
So come on in to a place that is fine. I'll be your friend and you can be mine. The world is a stream of constant bullshit, but that doesn't mean there's not a whole lot of good shit. You start with the lean and we can make something different. Let's build a world that is good.
This is a show for adults. Hi, friends. Welcome to the good world. My name is Seth. We're going to see how this goes. So over the weekend, Susie and I had plans to go and visit her grandpa, Steve. And Steve turned 94 a week and a half ago. And he is from Brooklyn, New York. He is very proud of being from Brooklyn, New York. He has a really, really strong part of his identity is being from Brooklyn. And so for his birthday, we ordered a bunch of food, a bunch of classic New York food. We got some knishes, we got some corned beef, we got black and white cookies, we got Junior's cheesecake, which was a big one for him. And so we were driving down on Saturday to visit him. And while we were on the way, we got a text that he had fallen. And as I said, Steve is, I think I said, he's 94. He turned 94 a week ago. And so we were coming down to celebrate his birthday sort of a little late. And yeah, he fell. He went to the ER. And something that people don't necessarily know is that when you are 94, if you fall and fracture your hip, as Steve did, we don't think of a broken bone as being something that is fatal, but if you are that old and that frail, and he is pretty frail. He's still alive as I record this. He will probably not be by the time this posts. Back in, I think, September? Yeah, it was September. He made the decision, his kidneys were starting to fail, as happens when you are, at that point, 93. And he made the decision that he didn't want to go through dialysis to try to prolong his life. And there was actually a study that came out shortly after that, and I'll link this down below, that found that for people of his age, of a really advanced age, dialysis doesn't really prolong your life very much. It maybe gives you an extra month or two, but of that extra month or two, most of the time is actually spent in the hospital. So it does extend your life a bit, but not in a way that improves or even maintains your quality of life. And so he decided he would rather die on his own terms, which is, which is a him decision, and is the kind of thing I think in our culture we have a hard time with that. We have a hard time with the idea of accepting death, even for someone who is 93 or 94 years old. And so just to sort of catch you up, so Steve fell and was admitted to the hospital, and we went to visit him. I'm going to try to get through this without crying too much. And he had not yet been admitted, so we were only allowed to have one person visiting him at a time. And so I let Susie and her dad go and spend time with him, and I went and sort of ran some errands, and I brought the food to the house so that me and Susie and her dad would at least be able to enjoy what is for us also comfort food, right? I also grew up in New York. Susie's dad grew up in Brooklyn. Susie spent her entire childhood going to visit her grandparents in Brooklyn. And so for all of us, New York, knishes, black and white cookies, and cheesecake. Susie doesn't like corned beef as much, but the rest of it is comfort food for all of us. So he was in the hospital, and Susie and her dad signed the paperwork to transition him to hospice, which you may or may not know. Hospice basically means it's usually really right at the end of someone's life. Sometimes someone makes the decision and they end up in hospice for longer. I have a friend whose mom was in hospice for several months at least, maybe even a year. She had pancreatic cancer, but hospice means we're going to stop trying to treat whatever it is that you're dealing with, and we're just going to focus on comfort and sort of making sure that your process of dying is as comfortable as it can be. I guess I didn't finish saying, when you are 94 and you fracture your hip, it can be fatal because basically it's just such a shock to your system. Your body doesn't have the ability to heal it. None of us went in there expecting the doctors to want to do surgery, but they confirmed, he probably wouldn't make it through a surgery if they tried to do a hip replacement. So yeah, he was transferred to hospice on Saturday, which just physically meant he stayed in his hospital room. And then I'm recording this on Tuesday the 18th, and so yesterday he was brought home. They set up a hospital bed in the house, and so he's going to be able to die at home, surrounded by family who love him a lot. And if you watched my episode with Sean Donaghy and Michael Freedom Becca, you heard me talk about how difficult it is for me to cry, and how I tend to, not even intentionally, but I just have such deep habits of holding in my emotions. And so I wanted to talk about this in part because I realized when I went to the hospital to say goodbye to Steve on Sunday, just how much I love him, and just how much he has meant to me. And you can see it from the fact that I am crying. I've been crying a lot the last couple days. And, I'm not, like, the point of this is not sort of the great victory of letting my emotions come. The point of it to me is that I don't think there's really anything more important to us than the people in our lives, and the people who make us feel loved. And my grandparents, my last grandparent who was alive was my dad's mom, who died in 2008 or 2009, I don't remember. And she had been in pretty advanced dementia for the last couple of years. And so my last grandparent who died, who I was able to sort of interact with on a personal level as she was going through it, was my grandmother, my grandma Jean. And I think she died right before my 24, right before my 24th birthday, she died. And she had also been transferred to hospice. And I didn't really understand at that point that hospice meant she was choosing, not just she was going to die, she was choosing to die. I had thought she had congestive heart failure. It was a very, very long years of going into rehab centers for treatment for, weeks, I think even months at a time. It's been a while. I honestly don't remember exactly how long, but she had like 4 or 5 times she had gone into a rehab center for treatment and been more or less fine, come out, and so my experience of her towards the end of her life was just she kept sort of being okay, and yeah, she would go in for treatment and then she'd come out and be okay. And so when she entered hospice and went home to choose to die, my parents explained it, but I don't think I fully processed it. I'm sure they said something to me of she's choosing to die, and my brain was sort of racing and it didn't register. And so I remember that when I was saying goodbye to my grandma, one of the last things I said to her was, "You're going to get better," because I believed it, because she had gotten better so many times. And now that I'm a little older and I understand what hospice is, I feel, I don't think she was mad at me, but I feel a little silly about that. And I also just, I don't carry a deep regret with me, but I like a little bit wish that I had been able to really engage with the fact that she was dying when I went to say goodbye to her. And so Steve, across the 8.5 years that I have known him, has been another grandfather to me. And I don't know how much I've talked about my grandpa David before. I have a picture of him right here. Actually, I'll put the picture up in the video. So this is a picture of my grandpa David. And I was very close with him, but he died in 1990 or 91 when I was 9. So I didn't have an adult relationship with him. And I will now, here's a picture of Steve. I'll put up the picture. So Steve was pretty young when Pearl Harbor happened. I think he was like 12. And that was a formative experience for him, right? He was 12 years old and the U.S. was attacked, surprise attack, led to the U.S. entering World War II. Very big deal. And so Steve, when he was old enough, joined the Navy and was an airplane mechanic. And he served in the Navy, and he was an airplane mechanic for a long time, and he worked on airplanes sort of for his career for a long time after that. And the Navy was a big part of his identity. And Pearl Harbor was this really, really formative experience for him, right? Being a child and listening to the radio as this is going on, listening to FDR talk about this is a day that will live in infamy. These things that for me are out of a history book and feel long ago to me were foundational memories for him. And so it was always something he always wanted to do was go to Hawaii and visit Pearl Harbor, and also just visit Hawaii because it's a beautiful place. And so a few years ago when he was 91, we managed to get it together and take him. And we took him to Pearl Harbor, and we got him, they arranged a sort of, I don't know, they have sort of a full tour that they give to people of that generation, right? A 91-year-old Navy vet comes to visit, and they show them around and sort of and treat them well, right? Like not like it gave him kind of the VIP treatment, not in a gross way, but just like gave him a lot of care and a lot of attention, and took him around and talked to him and listened to him while he shared stories. And it was really meaningful to get to do that with him. And so the picture I'm going to put up here is we went to, there's a museum full of old airplanes. And here, this is a picture of one of the old fighter planes. And, they had this scowl on them. And so I got him to stand with me, and we made this scowling face to sort of mimic the airplane. And I just really appreciated how game he was to just go along with this kind of silly thing that I was doing for a photo. And that really was him. There's another picture that Susie reminded me of that I will put up here, which is from our wedding. And after we said goodbye at the hospital and left to go to the car, Susie was telling me that Steve loved me so much, and she reminded me of this picture, and I loved him so much, and I got to tell him that on Sunday in his hospital room. He wasn't. It was hard to tell if he could hear. Right, because of the pain from the fractured hip, he was pretty hopped up on morphine, and so he was mostly just passed out the whole time we were there. But there was sort of a brief moment where one of his eyes just opened a little, and it seemed like maybe he was registering that we were there. And I told him I loved him, and I told him he was a great grandpa, and I really appreciated his being my grandpa. And this, I think, gets to the difference between like your genetic family and your chosen family. And a lot of times that can be the same thing, but there can be people who are family who you are not genetically related to, and Steve was family. For the moment, still is. Um, yeah, he's been home now for about 24 hours. And so Susie and I, so we went from knowing it was going to be his last birthday, but sort of excited to get to have some of his favorite food with him and have this nice little, I don't want to call it a party. It was just going to be the four of us, me, Susie, her dad, and her grandpa, but just a nice little time together, and telling him that we loved him. And instead, as happens sometimes, right? You can't really predict life. And he, the day before we drove down, he had actually stayed in bed all day, and he had told my father-in-law, Andrew, his son, one of his sons, that he was ready. He was ready to go. And Andrew said, well, Susie and Seth are coming down tomorrow and they're bringing you cheesecake, so see if you can make it one more day. And so he got up in the morning really excited to visit with us, and he had a home care aide with him, and it was just, he slipped while he was walking to his wardrobe, and now we're where we are. And it's hard even when you know it's coming. Right, he's 94. He's had an incredible life. He was married to the same woman from when they were 18 until she died. They were married for over 70 years. They had 3 kids. They loved each other to the end. He still, at a certain point, she had to be moved out into full-time care, like residential care, and Steve would still go visit Betty every day, and he still loved her more than I have ever seen anyone love anyone. And he was just such a sweet and charming and loving man. And yeah, so he had an amazing life, and he has his 3 kids who love him, and he has 4 grandkids who love him. He has 3 great-grandkids who love him, and that's just sort of the direct descendants, right? That doesn't include me, even though he called me grandson and I called him grandfather. And the reason I wanted to share all of this today, thing one is I have talked before, I think it is important for men to see other men be emotionally vulnerable. I think we live in a culture that tells us not to have feelings unless those feelings are anger and hatred and like violence. But we have the full range of emotions inside us too. We just often bury them. And I have spent a lot of my life burying my emotions. And so I just wanted to come here and share, this is what I look like when I try to feel my feelings. That is one part of what I wanted to say. A larger part of what I wanted to say is that this is coming for everyone, right? I talked last fall about I went to a Flaming Lips concert. They played Do You Realize? And I had this moment of, it's the Buddhist teaching on impermanence. Everyone you know someday will die. And we live in a culture where there are some people who are like, no, we're going to conquer death. There's no scientific reason we can't conquer death. We're going to conquer death. And it's like, okay, what you actually mean is you're going to delay death for however long you feel like. Because if you live for 10,000 years, you're probably going to eventually get sick of it and decide it's time to go. And even if you don't, eventually we're going to reach the heat death of the universe. And so even if you have insisted on staying alive till that point and the technology allows it, then you'll still die, right? The universe will experience heat death. Everything will die, including you. There will be nothing for you to eat. There will be no water for you to drink. Everything will be done. And even if you think you are going to conquer death, I am so skeptical that that's going to happen anytime soon. And I think for the most part, I don't want to say that the scientists who are pitching this to the extremely rich people funding them, I don't want to say the scientists are lying. I think they genuinely believe they can do this. I think the extremely rich people who are hiring them are hiring people who believe they can do this, and it's a bit delusional, and I also don't really understand the point of it. I don't understand why you would be so afraid of a thing that every human being has ever experienced, death is undefeated, that you would watch everyone you know die and insist that you not follow them into that darkness because you're so afraid. And that fundamentally is what it is, right? The people who are trying to defeat death aren't doing it because they love life. When they talk, there's no joy in the way they talk about their lives. They're doing it because they are afraid. First, they are afraid of their actual death. And then there's another part of it that happens where, and this is particularly common also among people who are extremely rich and powerful, you've maybe heard there's an expression, you die two deaths. The first is when your body dies, and the second is the last time someone says your name. Right? And the idea is that when you are eventually forgotten, that's a second death. And in a way that is true. But it is also the case that that second version of you that lives on, you're not there for it, right? Like, you don't get to enjoy it. And I think if your legacy, I talk a lot about Thich Nhat Hanh, the Buddhist monk and one of my favorite teachers. His legacy is one of peace. His legacy is one of compassion, right? And I think if you can leave a legacy that isn't about you and isn't about worshiping you, but is about helping the people who you teach, whether they're family or friends or whoever, helping the people who you influence in whatever way you influence them. If your legacy can be helping people live a richer life, that is the kind of legacy we should all want to have. And instead, we often have people seeking a legacy of, I want them to build statues. I want them to talk about how great I was, how many things I did. They're not saying, I want people to remember how deeply I loved and how deeply I was loved. And Steve's legacy is that he loved so deeply, and he was loved. Still at this moment is loved. I even would say, even after he passes, I will still use the present tense. He is loved. Thich Nhat Hanh also is loved. And I think when we so desperately seek recognition that we are afraid of what people will say about us after we die, it tells us something about how we lived, right? If you are so determined to control the narrative about you after you die, you have probably not lived in a way that helps people, right? If you are saying everyone needs to say how great I was, and I'm gonna make sure that happens by paying for statues, paying for books, basically propaganda about how great I was, then that's false. That's artificial, right? You're putting together a propaganda construct because you're afraid that people will tell the truth about you, which is that you didn't really live with a lot of love in your heart. And the lesson that we can all take from this is to live with love in our hearts, to find the people who we connect with and love them as hard as we can, because ultimately that is all we have. And that is the best legacy that we can leave after we go, which we will inevitably. There is another Buddhist teaching that when my meditation practice is going well, I think through this when I wake up. It's called the 5 Remembrances. I know last week I talked about the 5 contemplations before eating. There's nothing special about the number 5. It's just like a nice short list. But the 5 remembrances, and goes back to this is a Buddhist teaching from the Buddha, not from Thich Nhat Hanh. But the 5 remembrances are, I will get sick. There's no way to escape illness, which is true, right? No matter the amount that we would have to isolate ourselves to avoid illness, and it still probably wouldn't keep us from illness because you're still eating food. You still have to breathe air from somewhere. If you live entirely in a bubble that keeps you from interacting with someone, and I'm not talking about like people who have severely compromised immune systems. That's a different thing. I'm talking about people who withdraw from the world out of fear. They're going to get sick. The second remembrance is, I will grow old. There is no way to escape aging, right? We are all going to get older. We are all doing it. I am 42. I'll be 43 in a couple of months. I am bald. There are some gray streaks in my beard that you can maybe see here. I do not have as much energy as I did in my 20s. We're all aging. And I have really gotten to witness that with Steve across the last few days because in setting up the house for hospice, we went into his room and he has all of these old pictures. And we had pictures of him when he was a little kid, pictures of him from his wedding, pictures of him when Susie was born, and seeing the same person from age, I don't know, let's say 5 is the oldest one, up through knowing him at 94. And you can see it's the same person, but you can see that he's aging. The background in the story of the Buddha for all of this is that he lived a very, very sheltered life. He was the heir to a kingdom. And there was a prophecy that said either he would be a great king or he'd be a great spiritual leader. And his father didn't want him to be a spiritual leader. He wanted him to be a king. And so he kept him from seeing the pain and suffering out in the world. He kept him enclosed in the palace. And one day the Buddha managed to escape, got out and walked around the palace. And he saw 3 things. He saw someone who was very sick. He saw someone who was very old. And he saw a dead body. And he learned, these are things that happen to everyone. There's nothing about me that makes me better than these people. This is just part of the human condition. And a lot of our pain comes from trying to pretend that it's not. Trying to pretend that we can somehow overcome these things, that we are immune to the fundamental experience of being human. And so the third remembrance, right, I will grow old. I will get sick. The third one is, I am going to die. There is no way to escape death. And this is, again, when my practice is consistent, this is a thing I think to myself every morning. Because remembering that we're going to die, you don't have to fixate on it. Just be aware of it. Because it helps remind us of the importance and the value of our connection in this moment with each other. The fourth remembrance is... everyone I know, I will be separated from everyone I know. Fundamentally, it's everyone I know and love will die, right? But it's sort of put into terms from, everyone I know and love will be separated from me. And that can be by death. It can also not be by death, right? Sometimes we move to different places and we no longer see the people that we loved. And that is also part of being human. That grief and that loss is part of being human. And the fifth remembrance is my only true possessions are my actions, and I cannot escape their consequences, which hits pretty hard, right? We sort of accumulate possessions and literally things that we put an attachment on. And when we die, they're not going to be ours anymore. And everything around us is impermanent too, right? This shed is not going to be here forever. My computer's not going to be here forever. This shirt that you can get at goodworld.love it's going to deteriorate at some point, right? It'll crumble. The only real possessions I have are the things that I do with my time. Those I can keep in my memory and in my heart. And I like these teachings because they remind me of the importance of being present, not just with myself, but with other people, with the people that I care about. They remind me of the importance of loving and letting myself be loved. Something that I dealt with a lot in relationships before I met Susie, and frankly, for several years it was a challenge for me even after I met Susie, is letting myself be loved. On some level, I did not believe, this wasn't a conscious thing, but I did not believe I was worthy of love. And one of the easiest ways you could see this was I had lots of unrequited crushes, and then anytime someone was interested in me, I was like, oh, nope. Literally, my gut feeling was just, I'm not interested in this person. And on some level, that was me saying, well, if they're interested in me, there must be something wrong with them. I need someone who I can convince to love me. And I didn't realize that I could just accept love. And I have been learning to accept love in the same way I have been learning to accept my feelings, in the same way that I have been learning to accept mortality. Right? There was an earlier episode where I talked about having cancer. I had cancer. I had surgery last summer to remove a tumor from my stomach. It had been sort of a year and change treatment process. I am now cancer-free. It may come back because sometimes that happens. If it does, from my perspective, it'll be a new thing. But right now I'm cancer-free, and so I can celebrate that too. But also something's going to get me at some point. I would like to be around longer because I do love a lot about being alive, and I love the people in my life, and I love getting to connect with the wonder of this world. I love getting to appreciate beauty. I love getting to pet my dogs. I love getting to eat delicious food. I love watching hummingbirds in my yard. I love the artichoke plant is so full of artichokes right now, and I love watching them grow, and I'm so excited to see them turn into flowers. I'll put maybe a little video or picture just so you can see some of the artichokes. We tend not to harvest them because we can get perfectly good artichokes at the farmer's market to eat, and this way, they taste fine, but they're really, really beautiful when they turn into flowers. In the intro theme song, I'll put the still up here. There's a part where there are artichoke flowers growing out of bullshit. Right? Because the world is a stream of constant bullshit, but that doesn't mean there's not a whole lot of good shit. We live in a world where there can be a pile of bullshit on the ground and beautiful plants can grow up out of it. I love getting to experience that world, both the grossness of it and the beauty of it. And I love community. I love having people in my life who I love. And watching a loved one as they near death and sitting with them and telling Steve how much I love him, how much I'm going to miss him, and how much he has meant to me really reminds me of how much all of that means. And the price of love is grief, and that's okay, because grief is what reminds us of being human, and grief is what reminds us of our love for each other. So why would we want to cast it aside? Why would we want to deny it? Why would we not embrace it and feel it and experience life, the fullness, the richness of life? I'm not gonna do my normal goodbye song because, let's do it. You know what? Even amid grief and sadness, silliness is important. So we're gonna do the song if I can find. Here's my pick. Well, thank you, friends, for your visit today. Now it's time we both go on our way. The world will still be insane tomorrow, but don't let that fill your heart with sorrow. You can thrive in a desert, just ask a saguaro. Please give to my Patreon. Capitalism is fun. Let's build a world that is good. This is a show for adults. Thank you, friends. Go hug your loved ones. I love you and I appreciate you. See you next time.